the early rain fell in hushes, pattering softly on the rusted tin roofs of Makutano village, turning the dry ochre dust into puddles of muddy dreams. Thin smoke from morning fires curled from tiny clay chimneys, blending with the smell of damp earth and cassava roasting over charcoal. Women wrapped in faded chiton skirts shuffled between narrow market alleys, their laughter weaving through the clamor of chickens, bicycle bells, and vendors calling out their blessings and bargains. But in that hum of life, there was one figure who moved like silence itself. Kwame, wrapped in a once white blouse now grayed by time and scrubbing, walked barefoot past the stalls, her feet calloused and cracked, yet steady. She carried a woven bag so thin it seemed more spirit than sack, and in her eyes, deep, wide, and always searching, lived a heaviness that time had not been able to soften. Her presence stirred little attention, except for the occasional glance from those who wondered aloud why she still wandered there each morning when she clearly had no coins to offer. Her lips stayed sealed, her head gently bowed, not from shame, but the exhaustion of fighting to be seen. Children ran past her with pieces of fried maize, one boy bumping into her without apology, his mother throwing a sharp look her way, as if it were Kwame's fault for standing in a world that didn't want her in the first place. Most in Makutano only knew her by fragments. The quiet woman who worked at Mr. Adeyeme's estate in town, the one who never smiled, who wore the same skirt every week, who took the scraps home in a small metal tin if they weren't thrown out. She never spoke of her family. Some said she had none. Others whispered of a son who'd vanished during the border raids years ago. But no one had the full story. Only that grief made her skin too tight for joy to stretch across. She walked like someone counting every step toward an invisible destination, as though each moment demanded effort she could barely afford. Her hands, worn like river stones, carried the memory of hundreds of floors scrubbed and dishes washed in silence. Her fingernails were short, uneven, ringed with the permanent shadow of labor. Her blouse clung to her like a second skin, wet from the rain, but hiding nothing of her thinning frame. The old man who sold groundnuts beside the bus stand used to greet her once, until the younger vendors laughed behind their teeth, mocking the way he spoke to a ghost woman. Since then, even he averted his gaze. On that morning, Kwame stopped outside the butcher's stall, not to buy, she never had the money, but to watch. A woman with gold earrings and freshly braided hair wrinkled her nose as Kwame hovered too near. Her voice dipped low, but her tone slicing. Even the flies eat better than some people. The words weren't meant for confrontation, just cruelty. Soft enough to pretend it wasn't said, sharp enough to bleed. Kwame turned away, slow and silent. But the heaviness in her chest was real. She didn't weep. She hadn't in years. But something in her expression flinched like a wounded animal. Across the street, under the awning of a large white SUV, Mr. Adeyemi sat, hidden behind tinted glass. His chauffeur had stepped out for a minute to buy groundnuts. He hadn't meant to follow her that morning, not truly. But when he saw her at the gate with a tin in her hand, asking the cook if there were leftovers to take home, something compelled him. Curiosity, maybe, or guilt, though he wouldn't admit it then. Now, watching her from a distance, something stirred in him. Not pity, exactly. Something deeper. The ache of recognition, perhaps. He leaned forward just slightly, the rain trailing lazy fingers down the windshield, obscuring the moment like a veil. Kwame was walking again, slow and measured, her frame bent under weight no one else could see. And though he hadn't planned it, Mr. Adeyemi told the driver when he returned, "Don't go yet." His voice was quiet. "Just follow her, slowly." Kwame's feet pressed into the softened mud of Makutano's back roads, leaving shallow prints that the wind would erase by evening. She didn't look back. She never did. The village passed around her like a moving stage, distant chatter, the far-off bleat of goats, the hiss of morning life resuming its rhythm without her. She walked past the school she had once begged to send her son to, a building now full of bright uniforms, and bright futures she could never afford. The rusted swing set in the compound squeaked in the breeze, and for a fleeting second her eyes rested on it, unmoving, unreadable. Mr. Adeyeme's car kept a distant pace behind her, blending with the slow traffic and occasional bicycles, unnoticed. He sat in the back seat, his suit still crisp, his gold cufflinks glinting faintly. But his mind wasn't on his meetings. It was on her, the woman who had worked in his mansion for 3 years and yet remained invisible. He had never asked where she went after her shifts, never wondered why she sometimes tucked a dry roll into her skirt pocket. She always arrived early and left quietly. He thought that made her simple, replaceable. Now, seeing her out here, beyond the mansion walls, something else began to unfold. Not curiosity anymore, unease. He leaned closer to the window, as if doing so might make her story clearer. Kwame turned into a narrower alley, bordered by cracked concrete walls and laundry lines fluttering with faded clothes. A small boy ran out of one of the houses, barefoot, chasing a worn tire with a stick, laughter spilling from his lips like a fountain. Kwame smiled, faintly, but it was there. The kind of smile that belongs to someone who remembers joy not for what it is, but what it once was. She paused by a corrugated iron gate, knocked twice, then opened it gently. Mr. Adeyemi told the driver to stop further up the road. "Wait here," he said, stepping out. The air was thick with humidity, the smell of firewood and onions drifting through the street. He walked carefully, unsure why he moved quietly, almost respectfully, as though not to disturb a sacred ritual. He approached the gate, but didn't enter. From a distance, he could see what she had come to. The yard was no more than a patch of earth ringed with stones. A small shack stood at the back, its roof patched with plastic bags and bits of wood. There was a mat laid out beneath a mango tree, and on it 2 children sat cross-legged, a girl of about 9 and a boy no older than 6. Both were thin, their clothes threadbare, but their eyes lit up the moment they saw Kwame. "Mama!" the girl cried, rising to her feet. The boy followed, stumbling slightly, his legs wobbly. Kwame crouched and opened her bag, revealing a piece of ugali wrapped in newspaper, 2 slices of fried plantain, and a chicken bone stripped bare, but still holding traces of meat. The children didn't complain. They took the food with the reverence of those who know hunger too well, who've waited hours for a meal but say thank you before they taste it. Kwame kissed each of their foreheads, then sat between them holding their hands. The 3 of them ate in silence, the kind shared only by those bound by survival. Mr. Adeyemi stood frozen, his chest tightened. These weren't her children, that much he was sure of. He remembered her file. No dependents listed, no mention of a family, but the way she held them, the tenderness in her touch, this wasn't charity, it was motherhood, of a kind deeper than blood. He stepped back, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't name. Back in the car, he said nothing, staring ahead as the rain began again, light at first, then harder, beating down on the windshield. The wipers struggled to keep up. "Drive," he said softly. "Home." That evening, Kwame returned to the estate, late and soaked, claiming she had missed the bus. She apologized in the soft voice she always used. Mr. Adeyemi didn't speak to her directly, but something in his manner shifted, just slightly. The next morning, he asked the cook if any food remained from breakfast. "Pack it," he said. "Give it to Kwame when she leaves." The cook blinked in surprise. "For her?" Mr. Adeyemi didn't answer. Over the next few days, he watched her more closely, not with suspicion, but with attention. He noticed how she always worked in rhythm, how she fixed the crooked curtain in the hallway even though no one asked, how she polished the brass knobs when everyone else overlooked them. He saw the way her back curved when she mopped, not with laziness, but with years of carrying burdens too large for one person. He started to wonder about those children. Who were they? Orphans, perhaps? Street children she'd taken in? Why would she hide them? Did she fear losing her job? The questions haunted him. One Friday evening, he called her into the study, a room she had cleaned hundreds of times, but never entered unless it was empty. She stepped in, head lowered. "Yes, sir." He gestured to the chair. "Sit." Her hands trembled as she obeyed. He studied her, unsure how to begin. "You've worked here a long time," he said finally. "3 years, yes?" She nodded. "And never once late, never once complaining. You don't ask for anything. Why?" Her eyes flickered, caught between fear and confusion. "Because it is work. I am grateful to have it." "But you struggle," he said. "I've seen you. You take scraps. You don't eat here. You leave as if you have somewhere to rush to." He leaned forward. "I followed you once. I saw the children." Silence bloomed between them like a crack in glass. Kwame's lips parted, then closed. Her throat moved, trying to find words. "They are not mine," she whispered. "Not by blood. Their mother, my sister. She died during the fever 2 years ago. The father disappeared before that. No one wanted the children. The neighbors said I was a fool for taking them. I live in one room. I feed them when I can. I clean houses by day, wash clothes by night. I don't bring them here because I don't want pity. I don't want to be seen as a burden." Her eyes burned, but she blinked back the tears. "I only wanted to survive." Mr. Adeyemi was quiet for a long time. In that silence, he saw something, or perhaps someone, of himself. He had grown up poor too, though he never said it aloud. His mother had scrubbed floors, much like Kwame, but she had died before seeing him wear his first suit. And now, here was this woman, carrying the world on her back, asking for nothing. He reached into the desk drawer and pulled out an envelope. "Take this," he said, placing it in front of her. She stared at it like it was on fire. "What is it?" "A bonus. For the years you gave without asking, for the children, for the quiet way you endured." Her hands hovered above it, but didn't touch it. "Sir, I can't—" "You can," he interrupted gently. "And you will." She stood, overwhelmed, her breath shallow. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "Thank you, sir." But it didn't end there. The next morning, when she came to the estate, there was a bag waiting for her by the door. Inside were clothes, new ones, for the children, shoes too, and food staples, rice, flour, beans, powdered milk. A note pinned to the side read simply, "You are not invisible." Kwame clutched the bag to her chest, tears finally breaking loose, not from sorrow, but the strange ache of being seen after so long in the shadows. She walked home that day not slower, but taller, the weight on her back briefly lifted by the lightness of hope. The days that followed unfurled like petals after a drought, slow, cautious, and tender. For the first time in years, Kwame woke with a breath that didn't feel like a stone lodged in her chest. The children began to smile more, fuller, freer, and their laughter once again danced between the mango trees of their little compound. The girl, Amina, held her new school shoes like sacred treasure, polishing them every night, though they hadn't yet set foot in a classroom. The boy, Kofi, clutched his small book of alphabet letters as if it were magic. With the envelope Mr. Adeyemi had given her, Kwame had paid their overdue rent, bought medicine for Kofi's lingering cough, and stocked the cupboard with food that didn't have to be stretched into impossibility. Yet more than what she had gained, it was the feeling of dignity restored that made her chest ache most. Not just the fullness of her bag, but the fullness of being seen, being known. At the estate, things changed too. Mr. Adeyemi, though still quiet, began to look at her, truly look, when he passed her in the hallway. He no longer barked orders through the cook or left without a word. Sometimes he asked how the children were, if they had enough. Other times he left small envelopes on the table with no words at all. Just the same quiet generosity that now bound them in a strange but honest thread. Yet life, as it often does, remained poised on a knife's edge. It was a late Thursday afternoon when the balance shattered. The sun had slipped behind clouds heavy with storm, and a gray hush settled over the compound. Kwame had stayed late that day, scrubbing the tile near the veranda when she received a call from the neighbor, who sometimes watched Amina and Kofi. Her voice trembled. Kofi has fallen. Badly. He won't wake. The world blurred. Kwame didn't even ask for permission. She dropped the mop and ran, feet pounding, heart roaring in her ears, lungs burning with terror. The gatekeeper shouted after her, confused, but she was already gone, mud splashing beneath her as the sky opened and rain began to fall. By the time she reached the house, Kofi lay limp on the mat beneath the mango tree, his small chest barely rising. Amina sobbed beside him, clutching his hand, whispering prayers. "He tried to climb the tree, Mama," she cried. "He fell. He hit his head." Kwame scooped him into her arms, his skin already cold, his eyes fluttering. She screamed for help, but none came. No one in Makutano had a car. No hospital nearby. The only option was the government clinic 2 towns away, overcrowded, under-equipped, and miles too far on foot. Her heart cracked as she looked down at the boy who had called her Mama, despite blood saying otherwise. Desperation surged like fire through her. She wrapped him in her shawl and began to run, tears mingling with rain, her breath torn from her in ragged gasps. And then a horn. Through the curtain of water and panic, headlights beamed through the road ahead. A black SUV screeched to a stop beside her. The window rolled down, and Mr. Adeyemi's face appeared, alarm written deep into his usually unreadable features. "Get in," he commanded, leaping out to open the door. "What happened?" She could barely speak, her voice strangled by sobs. "He's dying," she said. "Please, help." He didn't hesitate. Kofi was placed gently across the back seat, Amina climbing in beside him, clutching his tiny hand. Kwame sat in the front, shaking, soaked, whispering prayers under her breath. Mr. Adeyemi drove like a man possessed, the tires slicing through muddy roads. Eyes locked forward, jaw clenched. The drive was a blur. Flashes of trees, potholes, blurred villages passing by. Kwame had her hand over her mouth, trying not to scream. Kofi stirred once, just once, and then went still again. At the clinic gates, Mr. Adeyemi leapt out, yelling for the nurses, his suit drenched, no longer a man of power, just a man desperate to save a child he hadn't known existed 2 weeks ago. They rushed Kofi in. For an hour, nothing. Then a doctor appeared, eyes grave but calm. "He has a concussion," he said, "but he's stable. He'll wake soon. He's strong." Kwame fell to her knees right there in the hallway. The floor was cold and wet, but she didn't care. Relief broke through her body like thunder. Mr. Adeyemi knelt beside her, his hand on her shoulder, and for the first time in all the years they'd known each other, she wept. Not silently, not politely, but deeply, like a flood unblocked. That night, as Kofi slept beneath thin white sheets and Amina curled beside him, Mr. Adeyemi sat outside the room with Kwame, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You saved him by never giving up. You saved both of them." She didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice rough from emotion, she said, "No one ever gave up on me before." And in that stillness, a bond formed, not of wealth or charity, but of understanding, of 2 people who knew what it meant to lose and to fight anyway. The clinic room was quiet the next morning, lit by soft golden sunlight pushing through the single cracked window pane. Kofi's eyelids fluttered open slowly, and his gaze wandered before settling on Kwame's face. Her head had been resting on the mattress, her hand still holding his. As his fingers moved slightly to squeeze hers, her eyes snapped open. "Kofi," she whispered, her voice trembling, her lips quivering before they stretched into a smile that held equal parts joy and exhaustion. Amina stirred too, and when she saw her brother awake, she leapt up and cried out with laughter and tears all at once. Mr. Adeyemi stood just outside the door, watching the reunion unfold like a miracle he had somehow witnessed from the edge of a dream. He felt something tighten in his chest. Not pain, not exactly, but something unspoken, something unfamiliar and humbling. It had been years since he had watched love this raw, this unfiltered by pretense or performance. It reminded him of the mother he'd once had, the childhood he'd tried to forget, the moments of hunger and hope he had buried beneath suits and salaries. Later that day, as they prepared to leave the clinic, Mr. Adeyemi didn't return to his office. Instead, he drove them all home himself. The children sat in the back seat, heads leaning together, weary but safe. Kwame sat beside him again, quieter now, but the silence between them was no longer awkward. It was sacred. At the small compound, she stepped out, carrying Kofi on her hip while Amina clutched a small bag of donated medicine. Mr. Adeyemi looked around at the home, the patched roof, the thin curtain at the door, the cracked cement, and something stirred in him, firm and undeniable. "This is not enough for them," he said suddenly. "Not anymore." Kwame turned confused. "Sir?" "You shouldn't be carrying the world alone," he said. "You were never meant to." He reached into his coat and handed her a small envelope. Not with cash this time, but with something else. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. Inside was a letter, an official one, with a stamp. Her eyes scanned it, lips moving silently. It was a work sponsorship letter, offering her a new position as head of household staff, with better pay, health benefits, and housing. "You and the children can move into the staff quarters," he said. "There's a unit by the back garden. 2 rooms. Safe, dry. Yours." Kwame didn't move. She stared at him, eyes wide, stunned into stillness. Then slowly, her knees buckled, not from weakness but from gratitude, and she sank to the step outside her door. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, pressing the letter to her chest. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You've said enough with how you live." News spread through the village faster than wind through maize. People who once whispered about Kwame's poverty now spoke of her strength. The woman who had begged for scraps had been chosen, not by luck, but by the grace of her persistence, her humility, her quiet defiance against despair. Even the market women began to greet her with gentler voices. The neighbor who once judged her children now came by with guavas from her tree. And every morning, when she walked her children to the school they now attended, with new uniforms, paid for by her own earned wages, heads turned. Not because of pity anymore, but because they had finally seen her. As for Mr. Adeyemi, something inside him had shifted, deeply and irreversibly. He still wore his suits, still held meetings, still signed contracts, and made deals. But once a week, without fail, he visited the back garden. Sometimes to drop off groceries, sometimes books, sometimes to sit with Kofi and teach him how to write his name, sometimes to let Amina braid his fingers with thread and laughter. It was not charity, it was redemption. And in that garden, where once he had never looked beyond his own walls, he now saw something growing. Not just vegetables, but a family rebuilt from ruin, and the heart of a woman who had once begged not for pity, but for the chance to keep her quiet love alive. Months passed like river currents, steady and full of unseen shifts. Life, no longer a fragile thread hanging over the edge, began to feel like a woven fabric, imperfect, but strong. The compound by the back garden filled with the smell of home-cooked beans and stew, the sound of Amina singing while sweeping the veranda, and Kofi's laughter echoing as he chased lizards through the tall grass. Kwame moved through her days with a quiet confidence now, no longer shrinking herself to fit into spaces that once ignored her. She wore her uniform like a badge of honor, clean, pressed, respectable. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They no longer carried only stories of sorrow. Now they carried light, the kind that comes from walking through darkness and surviving it. At the estate, she walked past colleagues who now nodded in respect, no longer dismissive or mocking. The cook who once sneered at her silent presence now asked her opinion about meals. The gardener brought her mangoes from the tree out front. Even the gatekeeper, the same one who once laughed as she was dismissed for begging, now opened the door for her with a hand over his chest. The world hadn't changed, not completely, but she had. And in changing, she had demanded something better of it. One Friday afternoon, under a soft golden sky, Kwame stood by the back garden where Kofi and Amina were picking hibiscus flowers. Mr. Adeyemi approached quietly, hands in his pockets, watching them with that same solemn tenderness that had become part of him. He had shed the cold, unreachable shell he once wore, not entirely, but enough for something real to show through. Kofi tells me he wants to be a doctor, he said, voice soft. Kwame smiled, brushing soil from her fingers. Yes, says he wants to fix people so no mother ever has to run like that again. Mr. Adeyemi chuckled, then grew quiet. You gave them a future, he said. I just helped you hold the door open. She looked at him, her voice low. You didn't just open a door. You saw us. That was the beginning. There was a long pause. The wind stirred between them. Then he turned toward her fully. Do you know why I followed you that day? She shook her head. I saw something I couldn't ignore anymore. I saw the way you looked at that leftover food. Not with hunger, not like someone greedy, but with hope. Like you were saving someone else. Like the scraps were meant for someone you loved more than yourself. That look, I hadn't seen it since I was a boy, since my mother. She was like you. The words settled between them, heavy and tender. Kwame said nothing. She simply placed her hand over her heart, and he nodded. An unspoken understanding sealed not with promises, but truth. That evening, as the sun lowered and the sky turned amber, Amina and Kofi ran inside, arms full of petals and small joys. Mr. Adeyemi watched them go, then turned to leave. You'll be all right, he said quietly. You already are. And with that, he walked away. Not as a savior, not as a boss, but as a man forever changed by the simple, unbreakable power of love, the kind that asks for nothing, but gives everything. That night, as Kwame tucked the children into their beds, she stood by the window for a long time, watching the moonlight spill across the tiled floor. She thought of all the nights she had gone to sleep, wondering how they would survive another day. She thought of the first time she held Amina's tiny hand, and the moment Kofi called her Mama without hesitation. She thought of the market stairs, the whispered judgments, the long hours scrubbing floors that were never hers. And she thought of the man who had once ignored her, then followed her, then wept quietly beside her when life nearly slipped away. She didn't have riches, not by the world's measure, but she had a life no longer built on begging. It was built on dignity, on resilience, on children who dreamed out loud, and on the kindness of those who dare to see past appearances. And sometimes, when the wind passed through the garden and she closed her eyes, she could still hear the soft voice of the boy who once almost left her, whispering in sleep, Mama, I'm okay now. And that was everything.